Good evening. Glad you're back to our study in Daniel chapter 3. We're going to go ahead and get started. So grab your Bibles. That would be my son messing with me. Good evening, everybody. How is everybody? Good. Boy, that speaker's really working tonight. So glad that you guys are here. We're going to finish up with Daniel chapter 3. Such a great story. And new things always unfolding, right? How many of y'all, after last week's study, went back and thought more about, were they standing together or were they standing separate? I know I did. I still, even today, a week later, still just astounds me at how we just automatically assume they were standing together when it doesn't even say they were standing together. And I was Janice, if they really were not standing together, the story just changes for me. It is so much deeper, so much more profound at the level of faith and confidence and trust in the Lord that they had to be able to, not knowing what their friends are going to do, they didn't care. In this massive amount of leaders, they didn't bow. They didn't care. And we're even going to see even more what happens and how much further they stand for the Lord. It's just a great, great story, one that I've always admired, always loved, and one that I pray that if the time ever came for me to be like a Hananiah, Mishael, or Azariah, my prayer is that I would stand, that I would not bow, no matter what everybody else is doing. Easy right here, right now, in the face of y'all, I have to say that absolutely I would stand no matter what. But man, these guys are facing death and facing all their friends and constituents, and it's a big deal. It's a big deal. So I would be careful for us to be so quick to say, yeah, I would stand. The question I would have to ask is, have we already made that decision in our heart? Have we decided today? Or are we waiting until the time and then say, well, I'll just kind of wait and see what the circumstances are and how it'll play out? They didn't wait. They already knew. They knew a long time ago. As we ended our study last week, we talked about how did they get to that spot? And remember, all the way back in Daniel chapter 1, verse 8, Daniel had purposed in his heart. We're not sure what the other guys had purposed, but we know Daniel had purposed in his heart. He made the stand. The other guys followed. At least these three men followed with him, maybe more, but according to what we're reading, only those guys really shine bright. And then we also know that when Daniel came back for the prayer to find the interpretation of the dream, those four men held together strongly, went to the Lord, sought the Lord, and Daniel received the vision from the Lord. And those men also were granted prominent spots in leadership for Babylon. So let's go to the Lord in prayer, and then we will continue our study of Daniel chapter 3. God, you are so good. I am already excited about what you have in store. God, what just such a great story, one that is very appropriate for us in today's time. We don't know when we are going to be called to have to take a stand on something. In the face of our friends, in the face of our constituents, our coworkers, our neighbors, God, give us the courage. Give us the boldness in the face of whatever it may be, without knowing what everybody else is going to do. May we individually in our own heart purpose tonight that we will stand no matter what. Lord, every day help us to reflect back on that thought and repurpose every day to where when the time comes, we can do exactly as Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah did as they stood. Thank you for the interesting thought that we've always made the assumption, but God, you are stretching our thinking to the possibility that they weren't standing together. And God, if that's the case, Lord, empower us as you empowered them. Fill us with the courage that you gave them. Fill us with the confidence in you that you gave them to stand alone. God, what a sobering thought, what an encouraging thought to know that you answer those prayers and that you can do that very thing. You can do exceedingly abundantly above all that we could ever ask or think. So thanks for this time. I just get carried away with this stuff because it's so good and so needy for us. So needful. Pray you would open our eyes tonight in Jesus' name. Amen. Sorry, got a little carried away on that, but that happens every now and again. It's just such a good story. I don't want to miss anything out of it, So let's go back and pick up in verse 13. Remember, this massive orchestra plays, everybody around them, all the main leaders of the province of Babylon are bowing. These three men did not. They get ratted out by certain Chaldeans, taken before the king. And here is what we find in verse 13. Nebuchadnezzar, in rage and fury, gave the command to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the gold image which I have set up?" Now, here's the ironic question. He already knows the answer to this. The reason that they are where they are is because, remember in chapter 2 when he says, hey, it's your God that has given you this revelation to Daniel. And Daniel says, well, it wasn't just me. I got 3 buddies that were a part of this as well. So he already knows who these men are, what they stand for. And remember, it could be 8 years' time that has passed on this. So I'm certain that he's probably had run-ins with them, many conversations with them, and I'm sure they have carried themselves in such a way that he already knows. And he looks at him and says, seriously, guys, you really aren't going to worship my gods or this image that I've set up. Now, if you're ready at the time, you hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery in symphony with all kinds of music, and you fall down and worship the image which I've made. Good. But if you do not worship, you shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you from my hands? If you remember last week, we talked about he's constantly trying to downplay God, always. You're not going to worship my gods because they're just as good as all these other gods. Well, who is the God that's going to save you? Because he's thinking about all these other fake gods that he's been following. And he's questioning, is it really your God that's going to save you? And the boldness of these 3 gentlemen, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar. Again, that's interesting because if you look back, what do the guys that serve him always say? O king, live forever. The conversation has changed. They know they are on the way out potentially. And now all the formalities are out the door. They don't care anymore. It's like, look, dude, we are on the same planet doing the same thing. Like, we are equal. So relax a little bit. O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. Again, this is not a smart aleck remark. It's you already know the answer to this question. We don't need to answer you in this matter because you already know. You already know. If that is the case, our God, and what are they talking about? If that's the case, you already know that we're not going to bow, is basically what they're saying. You already know we're not going to worship your gods. We've been talking about this for the last 10 years. You know that. So if it's the truth that you really are going to cast us into the burning fiery furnace, watch what they say. Our God, whom we serve, again, they're answering the question, are you not going to serve our gods? They're saying, our God that we serve, the one that we serve. We're going to serve a God, but it's the God that we serve. Our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. He's not necessarily saying that he's going to put the fire out. Not necessarily saying that he's going to kill you right here and we're not going to be thrown in. They're just saying, listen, no matter what you decide to do here, he's going to deliver us one way or the other. But if not, if he decides to let us go into the fiery furnace, if he doesn't change your mind, if he doesn't strike you dead, if he doesn't just whisk us away, if we end up going in, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up. The formalities are gone. It's no more you are our leader, you're our king. You're just Nebuchadnezzar. And I want you to know that what you're asking us to do, we cannot do. It is apart from us. It is beyond us. We are not physically, mentally, emotionally able to serve the gods that you have or to worship this image, because the God that we serve, we know has bigger plans. And if he chooses to save us from this, great. If not, so be it. We'll go in. So Let's pick up in verse 19 where we left off last week. We're going to read through 25. Before I read that, any extra thoughts that you've been thinking about since we left off last week? Any new revelations? Okay.
In verse 15, Nebuchadnezzar says, "Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand?" I think in the back of his mind, he was thinking, our God's don't do anything for us.
Yeah.
It's going to be something.
Yeah. His frame of reference is very limited.
How are they going to have somebody rescue them when these things don't do anything for us?
Absolutely. Yeah, his question is legitimate because he's never seen their gods really do anything. Anybody else?
Yeah.
Yes.
Thomas pointed out last week, this same verse, we were talking about how it's not capitalizing.
Right, yep, little g.
The King James version, the word God is capitalized.
Right.
So that adds a different element.
Well, we all know that's the original only version.
Right. But it adds different dynamics.
It does change it a little bit.
Yeah, so it makes me wonder, like, all right, so either A, he's being a smart aleck,
Right.
or
Good filter there.
yeah, if
Yeah, so when that type of discussion comes up, because it really is a popular discussion because of the different interpretations and the different versions and how they're written. For me, he's looking for any God. Any God. Any major player that's going to outshine everybody else. And we know the God that's going to do that. He doesn't. He's waiting for that God to just astound him, and that's the one he's going to go to until another one astounds him, and then he'll go to that one because that's just who he is. I mean, again, we're 8 years removed from the first time that he knelt and said, your God is the God of gods. Now he's back to, well, whose God really is that's going to save you? Sure. Yeah.
I see Nebuchadnezzar as when they say that my God, our God, is going to take care of us. His whole persona changed. You know, that I think that tore to his heart, and God was using that.
Sure.
But you know, he has all his friends and all his acquaintances that he's got to save face, and he just.
Oh yeah, we're getting ready to get into that for sure.
He
Yep.
just let it go.
Oh yeah, he does. Yep. Anybody else? Yeah.
Just that last section there where like they almost go into a recap. It's like the boldness isn't even just I'm not going to do it. The boldness is okay. Let's just go through this again. You want us to bow down? We are not. So regardless of what God does, if He doesn't deliver us this week on there, let's know why we're going in there. Like
That's
they're
good.
reaffirming. They're like everybody around us. This is I don't want anybody to be mistaken that we're crazy people. That we're like like it's. I love the recap, the reaffirmation of.
Sure. That's a really good point, Bill. Those last two verses, what they share with him is, let's be clear.
Yep.
Here's what you're asking us. Here's our response, and here's why. Just so everybody's on the same page. We're good either way. That's really, really good. Yep. Sometimes that's needed, right? And we don't always do a good job with that.
Especially in the heated moment. You know? And it was better than that.
In your head, right?
Wow. Let's just go to verse 19. Verse 19. Then Nebuchadnezzar was full, not just halfway, not just partly, but full of fury. And the expression on his face changed towards Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Now, for me, that leads me to believe that when he's talking with them, it's almost like a patronizing type facade of, come on, guys. You know, like, seriously, are you not going to, like, we've got this relationship, or you're not going to do it? And the moment that they look at him and say, dude, seriously, Nebuchadnezzar, we're not doing that. Everything just changes. He does not hide his emotions well at all. And it helps us see that he really is a little crazy. He spoke and commanded that they heat the furnace 7 times more than it was usually heated, because I guess the fire wasn't hot enough. He commanded certain mighty men of valor who were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and cast them into the burning fire furnace, because we all know that they really were going to push back at this, right? In their response, it doesn't seem like they're going to push back at all. Like, we'll kind of jump in there for you, like if that's what you want. Then these men were bound in their coats, their trousers, their turbans, and their other garments, and were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, because the king's command was urgent and the furnace exceedingly hot, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down bound into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. This is really, really hot. You've ever been to a bonfire and you walk up close? What happens? Your face just kind of starts melting, right? This furnace was so hot, and they had to get so close to throw these three men in that it killed them. Crazy. That's hot. Then, verse 24, King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished, and he rose in haste and spoke, saying to his counselors, did we not cast three men bound into the midst of the fire? They answered and said to the king, true, O king. Look, he answered, I see four men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the form of the fourth is like the Son of God. Some versions may say is like the sons of God, or like a son of the gods. So interesting story, way outside of the norm. Like, this isn't normal. You throw somebody in a fire, they don't normally just walk around. That's abnormal, in case you didn't know. Except when it comes to God, and God does things that are just abnormal for a purpose and for a reason. So let's get back to our notes. In verses 19 through 25, we see that he could not handle it. Nebuchadnezzar was so blown away by their response, he could not handle it. His emotions, they just spill all over themselves. The facial expression that he has changed. Now, if you've been around me at all, you know that I do not hide my emotions well. And so when I'm bothered by something, you're going to see it. When I'm happy, you're going to see it. When I'm mad, you're going to see it. It is a horrible trait God has gifted me with, that I cannot hide my emotions. And so that's what's going on with King Nebuchadnezzar. The moment that he figures out that these three men who he has invested so much time in, given them prominent places of leadership over parts of the world that he has conquered, now they're turning their back on him in his mind. Now, naturally, we could see where there's a little emotion that would be involved in that. Right? That would be a little hurtful, but it goes beyond that. Because it's such a spiritual turnover of, we're not worshiping your gods because your gods aren't good enough. You aren't worthy enough for us to worship you. Now it's hitting a little bit deeper for King Nebuchadnezzar, and he just loses it. And if he's having trouble with people staying loyal to him, this is only fueling that fire within him of, man, now I've got these three young men who I thought were with me. They are not with me now. But here's what's interesting. Nowhere in their response have they ever said, we are against you, king. You ever thought about that? Not one time did they say, you're an idiot, or we don't like you because you took us away from our families and you've castrated us and you've made us worship or follow all these other educational philosophies that we don't agree with. Not one time. Never have they said, we don't want to serve you. Never one time have they bucked anything. There's nothing like that going on here. And yet a lot of times when we feel disrespected or someone has a difference of opinion, we take it to heart way too fast. And that's what Nebuchadnezzar is doing here. All they're saying is, we can't worship your gods, but you can. We can't fall down and worship this image because it goes against who we are. But you are the king. We're serving you. So he doesn't like it, so he chucks them in the furnace. Now, this Babylonian furnace is a modern lime kiln. That's just what I read. I don't know what that means. It means it's big. I know that. It's open at the top where the contents are poured in. It's also open at the bottom to where they can gather the contents out. There's also an incline at the top of this kiln to where they could roll stuff up, or easy to get up to where they need to be to drop the things in. Now, he says, make it 7 times hotter. Now, help me understand the logic of that. If I wanted to torture someone or kill someone, I probably don't want it 7 times hotter because I don't want them to burn up so fast. I want them to know that they are being punished. But obviously, it's so hot that when the soldiers throw them in, it kills them. So why? The slow burn would have been a better torture factor, and they were thrown in with highly flammable cloth, which is different than what they would normally do. They wouldn't normally throw them in with all their clothes on. But in this instance, he's so rash, so upset, he's like, forget that, chuck them in. And it's so hot that the soldiers who threw them in. And he binds them tightly. They couldn't move. Why? You're getting ready to throw them in a fire. They're not going to run out. I mean, seriously. You just made it 7 times hotter. You know that that's going to just melt them. So you're going to bind them up too? What are they going to do? Swing at the flames? And these men do not seem like the type that are going to fight back. Now, granted, maybe he's had bad experience with that. Maybe he's just a crazy king and he's just really, really ticked off. So the strongest men were tasked with this binding, and we don't see any report of them fighting back. He's exercising his earthly power and his authority. He's showing them who's boss. You think you're in control? I'm going to bind you up. You think you know best? I'm going to make it 7 times hotter. I'm going to throw you in with your clothes on so it just burns you up. Again, it's just further rebellion towards God. But what's interesting is the very binding that was placed on them to exercise his authority and power burned off. We may feel like all of the authority and power in our world is very binding to us, but someday it's going to burn away and we're going to be free. And he goes to watch. Now, many people believe that he probably watched them up top. If this was a massive kiln, he watched them up top, be thrown in, kind of walk down to see them at the bottom. It's kind of the idea. This is not like just a little fireplace that you have in your house. This is a massive burning kiln. And so he goes down to watch. He wanted to watch them just burn, to be punished. And here's what he saw. He saw 4 instead of 3, which is just, it makes me giggle. Not because it's funny, but because it's just how God does things. Like we would hope to pray that God would spare them from being thrown in, right? I mean, that's logical. We don't want them to die. So God, you know what? Just fix it to where they don't get thrown in. He's like, you know what? I'm not going to let them die, but just watch. We're going to let them get chucked in. We're going to let them get thrown into this massive kiln that should just fry them. But don't sweat it because I got a plan. Now, I don't know about you, but plans like that make me nervous because it's not the norm. It's not what my mind conceives as possible. But with God, all things are possible. There you go. So here's what he saw. 4 instead of 3. No one was bound. He says they were not bound any longer, and they were walking around. Now, again, makes me giggle. What were they talking about? Could they feel the heat? Could they smell the burning of whatever was burning? Like, these are things that, in my mind, if I was thrown into a fire, I'm probably not going to be wondering, ooh, this feels warm. This smells so good, right? But them, they're literally walking around inside this massive burning kiln, just taking in the sights, completely unhurt. I love that it talks about not a hair on their head was singed. Now, I don't know about y'all, but if you ever mess with a gas grill, super easy to burn your eyebrows off. Y'all are laughing because you know, right? And burnt hair does not smell good, feel good, or look good, right? These men were thrown into a furnace that was 7 times hotter than normal with flammable clothes, and not one hair on their head was burned, nor were their clothes burned, but the bindings that bound them were, and they did not smell like fire. If you do any camping at all and you sit around a fire for 5 minutes, you automatically, for the rest of the week, everything smells like fire, which is a glorious smell. However, it's not a smell I want to carry on for the rest of my life. These guys didn't smell like fire when they came out. And this is what they experienced. Like, it just blows my mind. And here's what he said. He sees a son of the gods, or the son of God. It depends on how you want to look at it, and I'll give you some ideas of what people throw out there to kind of help us. Well, some versions will likely say the son of God, which that's what mine says. Many people believe, which is, I'm in this little party, that it was a theophany. It was a picture of Christ before Christ actually came. That is absolutely who I believe. I do not believe it was an angel. I do not believe it was anybody else but Christ in the fiery furnace with these men, which I think is phenomenal. Now, could they see him? We don't know. We don't know. We know Nebuchadnezzar saw 4 men, but we're not told whether these 3 guys saw the 4th man. Interesting thought. That kind of goes along with were they standing together or were they not standing together? But we know confidently because Nebuchadnezzar says, wait, did we throw 3 guys in there? We sure did, King. Well, there's 4. Another one is, you got to think about who's making the statement. King Nebuchadnezzar. He is not a believer or follower of God. So it, for the most part, does not make sense that he would claim that it is the Son of God in there. He doesn't believe in God. He doesn't subscribe to that. He believes in God's. And so it makes better sense to make the claim that when he says one looks like, it sounds more plausible for them to say like the sons of the gods or a son of the gods. Does that make sense? But again, either way, we know that it was something divine. We know that it was something spectacular. We know that it was supernatural, that God intervened in a major way, and I firmly believe, 1, because I've always been taught it, and 2, it makes sense to me that it was most likely a picture of Christ in the burning fiery furnace with these boys. The only thing, again, that was destroyed in this fire were the ropes. Now, remember those certain Chaldeans that ratted them out? I think the certain Chaldeans were hanging around to watch what happened. They wanted to see these men burn. They did not like them. They were waiting for the opportunity to catch them and to get them thrown out somehow, some way. They wanted to discredit him. They wanted to do anything that they could to destroy him. So I believe they were there. In fact, we see that he's talking to these certain Chaldeans. And we see in a little bit later that they actually notice all the things that weren't messed up with them. So let's read verses 26 on down. Nebuchadnezzar went near the mouth of the burning fiery furnace and spoke, saying, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God. Oh, now he got it. Come out and come here. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came from the midst of the fire. The satraps, administrators, governors, and the king's counselors gathered together, and they saw these men on whose body the fire had no power. The hair of their head was not singed, nor were their garments affected, and the smell of fire was not on them. So when these men come to examine, I could just see them kind of walking up and grabbing their hair and like feeling to see if it was brittle, walking up going, touching their clothing, like examining, maybe even seeing where they were bound, maybe because it was so tight it cut into them, and noticing that even though the ropes burned off of them, their hands and their arms, or however they were bound, were not singed. Can you imagine the conversation? The little side conversations that were happening real quick. Nothing, no blisters, not one hair singed, clothes were unscorched, and no smell of smoke. Now, the question that I have next is very interesting. Were Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, as amazed as the king and the other men? We always look at the amazement of the king and his workers. Let's just play with it for a minute. What's your opinion? How do you think these 3 men responded as they came out of this fire alive? What do you think, Ed?
I think that they didn't see, I believe, Jesus.
Sure.
Pre-incarnate.
Right. Yeah, the pre-incarnate. Yep.
Jesus.
Sure.
Because otherwise,
That's true. Good point. Just walk right out.
Why are they walking around the fire? I think they're following Jesus.
That's a good point. That's a good point. Ed brings up the idea that if we fell into the fire and God spared us from the fire, why would we want to stay in the fire and walk around unless there's something drawing me there, which would make sense as to why they stayed, because Christ was there. Which, wouldn't you want to know what the conversation was there, man? Woo, that'd been fun. Anybody else? What else? What do you think?
I think they reduced, but they held it in.
Okay.
Because they, they didn't want to jump up and down. And,
So you feel like they came out calm, but inside they were just like raring to go. Sure.
Humble.
Yeah.
God would do that.
Right. And maybe that's what Jesus was telling them. Like, guys, now listen, when you go out, like you got to downplay this a little bit. Like, you can't go too crazy. Like, let me do my job. Like, just chill out. I'd be like, you got to be kidding me, man. No way. That'd be really hard for me. Woo.
I think God's working in more spots on this than just people not burning in a fire. Because we read, look at the story, right?
Mm-hmm.
7 times hotter.
Yeah.
Right?
With 7 times hotter. 7.
Yeah.
Come on.
I mean,
Quinky dink.
That's the mechanism.
Yeah.
The soldiers that pushed them in killed because they got too close.
Right.
So God was working his plan as they were walking up this ramp to get tossed. Right? So the soldiers that are behind them pushing them in are being burned alive.
Right.
Right? So I'm sure they're screaming and writhing and whatnot. They're just talking. And then, it says that Nebuchadnezzar looked at the top. How did he get to the top of that fiery furnace and look down and call him out? So what that tells me is that God was working in more ways. He allowed that to be.
So show me where he looked into the top.
The mouth of the
Then verse 26, Nebuchadnezzar went near the mouth of the burning fiery furnace.
Correct. So these furnaces had 2 openings. They had a top, right, the mouth to bring out. It would look like a mouth at the bottom. I mean, it's just open. To me, the top would just be open. The mouth would be what we reach in and grab out. That would be me. That would be my assumption. I'm not a kiln person, so.
But anyway, I mean, it's just.
But you would think if it's hot up top, probably hot down at the bottom. Yeah.
It's hot all around. It just the duration of time that it took for them to walk up,
Mm-hmm.
with people screaming and being burned alive around them.
Right.
Around them, Nebuchadnezzar called them back out.
Yeah.
Whoever was in the fire with them.
Yeah.
Probably cool.
Yeah.
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 It probably had everything to do with it.
Sure. Could be. Absolutely. Yep. And?
I was thinking of Elijah
Mm.
because didn't he, want like 10 times the amount of
Mhm.
thrown on everything,
Mm-hmm.
and to kind of show how powerful God
Yes.
was, and God may have prompted Nebuchadnezzar to say 7 times hotter,
Could have.
to underscore the not like you just said, of course, fire,
Right.
but kind of hyperbole there, making it.
I'm going to make it so hot that your God can't save you,
Right.
whatever you're relying on. Sure. To exercise his power and authority to say, I got this. I can handle this. Hi. Are you okay? From me? Okay. Right now? Okay, pardon me. You do realize I'm teaching class right now. I love you. Sorry about that. That was my mama, and you're going to have to wait when my mama shows up. So there you go. Okay. All right. Charlie. Yes.
I think the way everything is recorded here, they had said something,
Good point. So your contention is because their speech to Nebuchadnezzar was so important and so vital that it was recorded, that if whatever they had said when they came out would have been profound as well, or monumental, or worth recording.
And
Could be.
That could have led to those three being elevated.
Sure.
Instead of God.
Mm-hmm. Could be. That's true, because a lot of times when we try to say something on top of what God has already done, we kind of butcher it a lot of times. Yeah. We turn it around to us rather than to Him. Sure. Yep. Yes.
You think that King Nebuchadnezzar was the only one that saw?
No, I really don't, especially after Ed's suggestion. I don't. You're asking about like the certain Chaldeans?
Yeah.
Like the rest of the guys? Yeah, I don't know, because the way he asks it, like, let me rephrase that. The way they answer it doesn't lead us to believe that they see it, because they would have said, well, yeah, we threw in, but you're right, King, there's 4 in there. He's the only one that really says that there's 4. So it could be that he was the only one that could see it. Yep. Yes. Yep. Yep. Yeah. Yes.
I can think of, when you said, I wonder if everybody was Samuel. It says that Nebuchadnezzar went to, he's probably alone, probably everyone else.
It could have been, yeah. He could have said, you guys stay back.
But it made me think of, all the prophets in the Old Testament and New that, weren't spared and died, and were not delivered in the miraculous fashion. The Kings of Chronicles talk about Elisha, when Venus and Mary was after him, surrounded his city, servant was terrified, and Elisha said, open his eyes, Lord, and he saw what was actually there. And that's how it is, like all the ones that died, Jesus was still there.
Right.
Just because they couldn't see him, because we couldn't see him. Still.
That's good. And that's a great reminder to us. Even though we don't feel him or see he's still there. It doesn't change anything. That's good. Anybody else? Yes.
I think that when we look at that question posed about Nebuchadnezzar, whether it's on top of that verse.
Sure, yeah. Mm-hmm.
When you look at the verse 26, 24, then King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet and asked his advisors, weren't there 3 men who died up to the 5? They replied, certainly, O king. I think they were all looking at that queen out.
Sure.
He was probably sitting on his throne now, waiting for the prize to come.
Right. Yeah.
And here they are walking around. So he jumps up. Did we put 3 men in there? It's just it amazed him that there were more people.
Yeah. Oh, yes. And part of the issue for me, well, part of the thought process for me is he's already a little crazy. Like he's very emotional. Like he's very up and down. And so he went from this really high, super angry, I'm going to kill you 7 times hotter, bound you up, throw you in. Now he's sitting on his throne. He's like, wait a second. Am I seeing things? Am I going crazy? Because there's 4 dudes in there instead of 3. Right. Imagine that, right? Yeah. And yes, that's a great statement too. Now what do? I would imagine to some degree that's what's going through his mind in a very big way. I just made this big statement. I'm going to throw you in a fiery furnace and kill you to show my power and authority. I've thrown these dudes in to prove that I will keep my word. And now they're still alive. Now what? Yeah. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Yeah, Ed.
It's interesting that he only asked the 3 of them to come out. He didn't ask the other guy.
That is a great point. It said that he only asked the 3 guys to come out, and he's probably said, you know what, you can stay in there. That's where you came from. That's good, Ed. Yeah, John. Right. Right. And it would seem
he is so much on the throne of his own
Right.
What keeps a person, and this is the application for me,
Sure.
what keeps a person who sees God at work from saying, I want to meet the Son of God?
Well, you know what it is. It's pride and arrogancy. And if he comes out, I lose control. I'll have to give up everything.
I don't even want to know about
Yeah. Just give me the other three. Let me deal with them. I can deal with them, but not him.
Could you imagine the story though? How you come out? Wow.
I don't know that he would have. I'm not convinced that he would have. I think because, and the reason I say that is if he wanted to be seen, he would have maybe shown up before. And he doesn't need Nebuchadnezzar to call him out. He's not waiting for his permission. That's a good thought, because that would have changed a lot.
I don't think he's ready to come out. I think,
That's a good point too. Yeah, it wasn't his time yet. Yeah. Yep.
The song out, it's still in the fire. And it's really true because that was little boy asked his mother where the Lord came from. His mother said he's still in the fire. And that's one thing we can look at today. Whatever we go through, he's still with us.
Yeah, sure. Tatiana?
The furnace reminded me that the verse in 12:29 says, for our God is consuming fire.
Yes.
And then just began my thoughts thinking because those men who was throwing to the they didn't believe in God.
Nope. And they were consumed.
And they were consumed by our insanity for our God.
Nice.
And Jesus is salvation.
Mhm.
God only through Jesus.
Sure.
And Jesus himself was the Holy Spirit.
Absolutely.
What a wonderful promise to the Lord and just look back what he said.
Sure.
I truly believe that those things that something will not know that they truly not what they said, even if it doesn't move.
Right. Yeah, I think it's the faith in knowing that God will do what is best for them, no matter what that is. Now, we interpret that as what's best for me is what I think is best for me, and that's what he needs to do. And the reality is that's not really how God works at all, actually. Absolutely. Yes. Yes, Tatiana, I think that's the biggest thing for this story for me is just to be able to, no matter what's coming down the pipeline for me, good or bad, it shouldn't matter. It shouldn't change my view and change my confidence in who God is. And that's such a great point. It's a good point. I really am intrigued. Like I really wish, hopefully someday, like I've always said, when we get to heaven, they'll have recordings of the conversations or replays of, like, I would love to know what was going on in there. Like seriously, these men literally knew their life was ending. They're marching up the side of this hill to go into this burning fiery furnace, only to be chucked in. And on the way down, however long it was, when they land, they're not burning, they're not dying. The ropes are loosed, and they hop up, and then they see Jesus. Like, I can't even, like, I know when I get in a spot and I finally can turn that corner and really see what he was trying to do and what he's trying to teach me, it's very relieving and very encouraging to my heart. These men literally gave their life up for Christ, for God. And then they met him.
I think, too, that they were so assured of their relationship with God that they knew they would either be delivered from that or in that.
Yes.
And, it didn't matter to them what happened. They knew that God was with them.
Yes. And Phil, that's such a big concept and foreign to our world, is being delivered in death or through death. Either way. Like it's just an interesting thing.
I find it kind of interesting. Maybe I'm just a little behind the curve here. We're don't joke about the furnace being 7 times higher.
Right.
He just hit me. What's that number 7?
Yes. That's what I was hinting at earlier. I didn't know if you got that or not. Yeah. I mean, no, it's not. It's Christ's system, God's system. He sure does. A little bit. Yeah. Which, again, it's just a coincidence. Everything in Scripture is just coincidences. Yeah. So The answer that I believe that I'm resting on for my question of were they as amazed as the others? I say no, and I go back to verses 17 and 18, and I go back to their answer. And their answer again was, if that's the case, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, we will not serve your gods, nor worship the golden image. I don't think they were shocked or blown away. I think they were appreciative and amazed because it was different maybe than what they thought it was going to be. But I don't think it just blew their mind, because I think of their experiences with God already prepared them for just another opportunity for him to do something great. I think that's one thing that I love about our church is we've experienced so many things that when he does another thing, we get excited and not like, oh, it's like, yes, he did it again. Another opportunity for us to celebrate something monstrous that God has done, right? It's just good stuff. Yes, ma'am.
I would think they would be blown away because when you step out in faith,
Yeah.
you just know and you trust God, like truly.
You don't know what's over there, but you know right here, right now, I'm good. Yes. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I am absolutely blown away every time I see it.
Yes.
Metaphoric fires, but
Sure.
fires,
You're right.
You know, but
Right.
I'm always blown away at how he works out. It's never how I would have
Sure.
thought it to work out.
So let me ask you this,
Yeah.
because I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
But could it be that being blown away by what God does in a spiritual sense is different than being blown away by something exciting in the world?
It's definitely.
You know what I'm saying? I think there's a different emotional, rational response over here in the spiritual realm that kind of, it's just different. It feels different. It's better. It's solid, as opposed to just saying, oh, wow, look at that. That worked out. Does that make sense?
I think it makes it grow even more.
Yes.
Exponentially.
Absolutely.
You know it, you walk it, and then prove it.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, it expands.
Yes.
Your faith does.
I agree.
I think when I've had that happen, I am jumping up and down. Like, oh my, I knew it, but just to see it played out.
Yes.
It's just so different to
Yes.
walk it and see it.
Yes. And I think there's some validity to applying that thought to these men. If they came out all super spiritual and charismatic, it may not play out as well as just kind of playing it cool, like we told you this is what was going to happen. We were confident in what our God can do. Because I think we can kind of weird people out when we get a little over the top. You know what I mean? And I think probably in the moment, in the fire, they were probably weirded out and like went over the top. But it could be that as they're in there, they're like, wait a second, we already knew this was going to happen. We already knew something. God was going to do something. So let's go talk about it. Let's go tell him.
And I had that happen where I had doubters.
Yep. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yes.
And almost blocked me.
Yeah.
Because I said, God is always on time. And I may not need that right this second. Maybe I want it, but God is always on time.
Yes.
And he may not be working it out.
Correct.
The way I think he's going to work it out.
Sure.
When he worked it out better than I could ever imagine. And all the people that sat there looking at me like,
Yes.
what are you going to do? They were really critical.
Sure.
I went, told you God,
Right.
time.
And so that the whole time you're talking, I'm playing out the story in my mind in every aspect of your story right there. They're getting mocked all the way up.
Yep.
And the boys, on the way up, they're like, okay, God, like, this is it. But if you want to do something different, like, we're good. Like how we always do. It's not in our timing. And then when we're thrown in, we just kind of hands off and let it happen. And then when it happens, we're like, told you. Like,
And I did tell them,
yeah.
But
Yeah.
I was jumping up and down.
Absolutely.
Like, oh my God, like I knew it. I
Right.
knew it.
Right.
You know?
Yes.
So it's just, when it's proven out, it just does something to your faith that
Yes.
you can't even, I'm in awe every time.
Yes.
I see it. There's been times where it's been broke, like a huge growth, you know,
Mhm.
but it just, I'm in awe.
Sure.
Every time it
Yes.
happens. Like, I want more.
Yes. Yeah, oh yeah. Yeah. And I think one of the biggest challenges for us is not growing in those moments. Those are the easy growth. It's when God's not doing it the way we want him to do it. That's where the real challenge is can we maintain that same level of growth and excitement in the moments where it's not happening the way we want it as we do in the moments where he just does something supernatural. That's where it gets tricky. I mean, think of Stephen being stoned, preaching the gospel. Sure wasn't delivered the way we would want him to be delivered. Probably wasn't the way he wanted to be delivered, but he was absolutely delivered.
I wonder what effect that had on the other Jews.
That's a great question. Because I think, Phil, that's such a phenomenal question because I really wish I knew what happened to the rest of those guys. I mean, we only get a picture of 4 of all the Jews that were taken captive. And obviously there's got to be more. And where were they? Why were they not in tune with this? And does it inspire them to take that next step? It's a good question.
I really think they start questioning, hey, we
Yeah. Yep.
we bowed down.
Sure.
You know,
Yeah.
Why did we act like that when we could see that God acts like that?
Yeah. Absolutely. Anybody else? Yes, Tatiana. Okay. No. Right, but it's rough. Yeah.
And I was thinking about, I love it how you were testifying knowing because they did. Remember that he talks about to tell your children.
Yep.
So you got the light to cast the fire.
That's true.
Down and burn down. So almost like it's so beautiful because these young men testify, we know God is able.
Yes.
God is able. And in faith, we took the leap of faith. Like we're gonna step in, but they tell us not.
Right, yep.
We're even not awesome.
Yes.
And that takes me all the way to the New Testament, where Jesus talked to Thomas, who doubted him, and he asked, like, I won't believe unless you touch me.
Right, yeah.
And he said, Thomas, you believe because you've seen it
Mhm.
and touched it. Blessed are those
Yes.
who see yet believe. We are those
That's us.
who
Mhm.
in faith.
Yeah. That's such a great point, Tatiana, because I think so many times we look at these older stories and we're like, oh, those are just nice stories. But the reality is these are faith builders for all of these people. And they're faith builders for us. Like Elijah is seriously one of my most favorite stories only because of the prayer that he prays. And he prays, God, I don't need this. This is for them. So if you could just kind of show up and do something cool, it's your turn. And he just steps back and waits. That's just neat to me. So, all right. Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
Those stories were repeated through all these.
All the time. Yes.
And then Jesus comes on the scene. I'm thinking about where you were preaching Matthew.
Right.
And he starts talking about the abomination.
Oh, yeah.
That doesn't have a happen.
It does not.
All of they've been hearing these great faith building stories for all these years, and then
It's a great point.
here he is.
And if you think about it, Janice, all the great preachers after that die horrible deaths. There's no like rah rah ree, here they are, like nothing like that. It's bad. That's interesting. Because we get so built on, well, God can do all this stuff, and yet God doesn't always do all this stuff. He sometimes lets it go a little bit different.
Probably added to their discomfort.
Sure. And probably his message of, I'm going to die for you. Wait a second, you're the king. Like, you're God's son. No way. Yeah, I am. It's got to happen.
Or did he get
That too. He definitely didn't carry himself like an earthly king. Anybody else? Okay, let's finish. Let's finish this so we can be good. All right, last few verses. Verse 28. Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel." Now, this is his explanation of who was in the fire. We see it completely different. delivered his servants who trusted in him, and they have frustrated the king's word and yielded, their bodies that they should not serve nor worship any god except their own God. Interesting statements that he makes because he calls it as it is. Kind of like what they did beforehand. Now he's doing the same thing. Therefore, I make a decree that any people, nation, or language which speaks anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made an ash heap, because there is no other God who can deliver like this. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. Again, notice his declarations. It's always their God. He still does not recognize God as the one true God. It's their God is pretty awesome and amazing. Their God can only deliver like this. Their God is God. He acknowledges their faith, and he's so kind and stands for them and says, anybody that speaks anything against them, I'm going to cut you up and burn your house down. Right?
But, he doesn't take it personal. I mean, it's not happening to him yet.
Right.
So he's not got that personal investment. He can see all these things and great, but
Sure. Yes. Yeah. I thought you were going somewhere else with it, but yes, he's not making it personal to himself yet. It's, if that's who you want to serve, I recognize that God is pretty impressive, but so are all these other gods that we've got going on. But your God's a little different. He's at least going that far. Yeah, Charlie.
He knew that well enough. I go back over to verse 16. He says, "We do not take any."
Yes. Yeah.
Obviously, the king knows the answer.
Yes.
He's giving the answer they could have given over there. He knew them well enough to be able.
Right.
I mean, if you could put what he said into their mouth over here, they would say, "We're going to trust in our God. We're going to defy the king."
Right.
So it's just interesting to me that the king's so full of himself and he gets upset because they won't answer him, but he has.
He already knew. Yes. That's a great point. It is an interesting question that he asked them. It's kind of like that parenting thing when we already know our kid's done wrong. We ask them, hey, what'd you do? We already know the answer, but we want them to own up. And they didn't answer the way he wanted them to. We're going to tell you what it is. And he already knew. Yes, he already knew. Yep. So a couple of takeaways. 1, 2, and 3 I like. 4 I'm not convinced on yet, but maybe. Number 1, government is ordained by God. We know that in Romans chapter 13. But even though it's ordained by God or allowed by God, abuse of power can still happen. So that abuse is not ordained by God, but the structure of government, of some type of rules and regulations, that's ordained by God. It's blessed by, or not by, I'm not going to say blessed by God, but okayed by God. Commanding things contrary to God, that's a big no-no. So those are the issues that when we are commanded to do things that are contrary to God, that we have permission to say, I'm not doing that. That's not okay for me to do. That's what we see in this story. These guys have been doing everything that the kings asked them to do up to the point of defying their belief and faith in God. Number 2, contrary commands to God must not be followed by the believers. We all agree with that. Number 3, accept the consequences of disobedience to evil. We don't like that. Let's just be truthful on that. I don't like getting in trouble. I don't like penalties, especially when I know what I'm doing is right. But sometimes there are evil people who make evil rules that when I do not follow their evil rules, because I know what is right, I may still have to be punished with the consequences that they make up. Is that fair? No. But please show me in Scripture where anybody ever said that life was going to be fair for us. It's just not. We live in an evil world with evil people, with an evil king and ruler. And so things we are going to be commanded that we are to do, we must take a stand and react with hope. Come on, you didn't listen to Sunday's sermon. Just kidding. But we must react in a way that honors God and portrays the things that he's asked us to do. And the last one. This one can be contentious, and I'm so glad we only have like 2 minutes. It says, do not advocate to overthrow the government, continue to serve God no matter what. The reason that the guys that I'm reading and the way that they brought this up, their thought line is this. When Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego pop out of the fire, they had an opportunity right there to stage a coup and overthrow the power. But what did they do? They went right back into service to him. They know he's evil. They know he does not believe in their God. They know that he's going to probably make another dumb decree somewhere down the line. But at this moment, they are honoring God where God has placed them, and they are doing and continuing to do what they were called by God to do. That's tough for us. But I see that in this story. I think it's interesting. Any thoughts on that? You have 1 minute.
A lot of times we want to get in there.
Mm-hmm.
And they could have easily said,
Sure.
let's use our power.
Yes, I agree with that. And I do not think it tells us to be silent, because they weren't silent. They weren't silent over the food to eat. They weren't silent over, hey, we don't want to die. Can we pray about this? And they certainly weren't silent about, we're not following this dumb command of worshiping this image. Sorry. You might be our king. You are Nebuchadnezzar. However, we're not doing that. So do what you want. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
I think when you burn,
Yeah,
or I close to the fire, probably scream, roll on the floor.
sure.
I don't know, pass out because those smoke.
Yep, that's true.
And they seem to be very or calm or walking around the fire. For me, I think when Christ was with their apostles,
Mm-hmm.
both fish boats,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
and
Yes.
somewhere
Yes.
around, everybody was crazy around, but Jesus was sleeping. They wake up. I compare those
Sure.
stories together. And what I'm thinking is that for them, I think they think if I live, I live for God. If I die, I die for God.
Yes.
And sometimes the miracles happen in our lives, not mostly maybe for us, but for the non-believers to see the power of God.
I agree with
So
that.
that's why.
It's a great statement. He allows us to experience the things that we experience, not necessarily for our benefit, which we do get a benefit from it, but a lot of times it's for others to see what God is doing in our lives. Sure. It's a great point. Great point. All right. So don't forget. Yes, ma'am.
So I was just thinking, they were living well as
Yeah.
opposed to other people that were taking.
Sure. Yes.
So, in a sense, I mean, they could have turned that into an idol in itself.
Mm-hmm.
Blessing from how the
Yeah.
lifestyle they were living, which is better than what others were experiencing. And, they didn't compromise their beliefs to keep that. And that's what makes me think of that, and I can't say it exactly, but who was faithful in little.
Yes.
will be
Mhm.
given much. And so how were they rewarded? They were given more.
Sure.
And even the ability to worship God.
Yes. Right. Yeah.
So, they could have kept that, made that an idol, though, that's the blessing of, and so they get comfortable, and they're getting all this good food, and, they're living better than others.
Sure.
So, but they didn't let that taint their
That's good.
beliefs.
Yes, because there are a lot of Christians, a lot of pastors that have it good and allow that to kind of sway their position for the Lord in a big way. Sure. That's good. All right, next week we have picnic over out on the Upward property. So make sure you make plans to come for that. Bring your lawn chairs and a big appetite, right? We have 2 tickets to Sight and Sound. We're going to Sight and Sound to see David on July 7th. It's the 11 o'clock showing. We are going to be leaving here at 8:30. So 2 tickets are available. If you have interest in that, see Miss Linda right over there. She'll be happy to sell you those tickets. we're going to hop on the bus and $6 a gallon and roll up there. And it's $6 a gallon for diesel. Yeah, we're going to Fred Flintstone it all the way up. Y'all know what that means, right? Okay. Make sure. If I'd have said that with the teenagers, they would have been like, what? Yes, good point. This is definitely not the youth group. That's right. All right, let me pray for you. God, you are good. I appreciate the great, healthy conversation and thinking through these stories like maybe we never have before. And God, it's so good for you to continue to reveal things to us. But Lord, what a story of courageous, on fire living for you, no pun intended. God, it is amazing at the level of confidence that these three men shown in the face of adversity, in the face of their king, but in the face of their Lord as well. Lord, may we be found as faithful as they are. Lord, reveal in us whatever it may be that keeps us from being in that position. Lord, strengthen those areas that are weak in our lives that we may stand fervently for you no matter what. And may we always remember that you are always with us. We love you, we praise you, and thank you for who you are. In Jesus' name, amen. Tables and chairs, please. Have a great night. Excuse me.